All right, so speaking about just race relations and my experience with race relations, I have like an interesting perspective to start, and then I have a kind of a weird story. So when I was a kid, just like as far as like my race background, um, I identify most with black, and most of my family is black, African American. But like I'm, obviously pretty fair skinned, so I have a lot of different races within my bloodline, within my family background. So being in elementary school, I went to I'd say a 99% black school, or at least 90%. And you had Hispanics making up the second most. Um, I went to an elementary school with that kind of a background, and I was always the smart kid in class, got really good grades, spoke as quote unquote and those were the comments, and it was always weird. It was like, you sound like a white kid. You sound like a white kid, or you speak white, or, and I never understood that. I couldn't identify with it because it wasn't something. I just spoke how I spoke. I happened to, be smart, get good grades, and know what was kind of going on in the classroom, but I didn't necessarily identify that being a race type or a racial background. You're smart, you have to be white, you sound like you know what you're talking about, you have to be white. So, that background, I mean, that was probably when I was, elementary school. So you're talking about second grade, third, fourth, fifth, around that age. But just an interesting story about, generational racism or just perspective on race. I used to work at a catering hall in Jericho, Long Island. So whoever's familiar with that kind of a neighborhood, I worked at the Miller, Virginia, in Jericho, and I was a waiter there. And I remember this one particular party. It wasn't even my table; it was somebody else's table, and I was kind of helping them. It was like towards the end of the party, and I was helping them clean up and get some last minute orders or drinks or dessert at that time. And this one old white guy. He was definitely in the 70s, at youngest in the 70s. And I guess just making small talk or just trying to figure out who I was, because I hadn't been at the table all night. He asked what my name was, so I told him my name. My name was Aaron. His immediate response was, "Oh, that's an interesting name for a black guy." I was like, it took me like by such surprise, and I think I just stood there and looked at him for a second, and then I asked him, "What did you say?" And he just repeated it, but the way that he repeated it was just as natural as the first time that he said it, that I couldn't even get upset because our perspectives are completely different. I grew up, and after elementary school, I went to public, private, public, private, public, private, and I had been around so many different types of people. And then I got to travel a little bit, further out into the city, further out of state. Went to Barbados when I was really young and saw how different cultures, not necessarily different cultures, but just different people that weren't on the same block that I lived on or weren't already my friends, how they lived. And our perspectives were completely different. His perspective was, I don't know if it's generational racism or if he would even consider that to be racism. That just could just, that's his just knee-jerk response. Yeah. So I wasn't even upset at it. I just said, you know what? Here's somebody who, however old he is and whatever his background is, that happens to be his point of view on things. You could talk to his son. His son maybe not, maybe wouldn't have the same perspective on things. So I say all that to say this, like the way that I view race, it's the same way that I kind of view, at least when you talk about news and you talk about what's currently going on and things that make people emotional, I look at it as just that. I look at it as more of a distraction or whatever the bigger picture is. I look at race the same way I look at sexism. Racism is the same. To me, it all, and even religion in some points, to me, it's all a distraction from the bigger picture. I think when you look at images that are put into the media, and you have a certain race that's made out to look a certain way, and you start talking about stereotypes that are portrayed through the media, I think a lot of times it has nothing more to do with anything more than we have a certain way of doing business, and we have to kind of keep you looking at yourself as less than what you really are in order to keep our way of business going.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's just money to me.
Mm-hmm.
I look at a lot of older white people, and I think they just happen to be white, but they're in power and they have money. If you have older black people and they grew up, moving around the same way, who's to say they wouldn't have the same point of view about another race? It's all about like classism almost. Just the way that we have a certain way of doing things, and if you see yourself as more or closer to what you really are, which is an equal human being, who's to say that wouldn't disrupt our way of doing business? So I don't know. That's kind of like my background. Me personally, like I see no color. I interact with all kinds of people. I have all kinds of people in my bloodline and my family, as well as people that I consider to be friends and very close. People that I do business with, the whole nine. And at the end of the day, if you have something intelligent to say, we can have a good conversation. I think that's how everybody should kind of look at it.